Hi everyone, in this series I'm going to be going through some of the fundamental basics in Maya 2013. In this particular video I'm going to expand on the information provided in the component selection video from the Essential Skills Movies panel. So let's quickly go over what was covered more or less in that video to begin with, just to refresh our memories. So if I have a polygon object, let's say this sphere, I'm going to switch to my solid view so we can see those polygons or faces. Basically, this object is made up of three main component types. We have vertices or points, which are represented by these little dots. And these basically are a single point in three-dimensional space. We then have edges. An edge is basically the connection or the connecting line between two vertices or 2 points, like this. We then have faces. Faces are made up of 3 or more edges and are basically represented by the space filled in between those edges or inside those enclosed edges. So a 3-sided polygon is often called a tri or a triangle because that's the shape it's formed. A 4-sided polygon, such as this one that I've got selected, is often referred to as a quad because it has 4 sides. You can see on this sphere we have predominantly quads, but at the pole at the top of the sphere we have tris, and we also have tris at the bottom pole of the sphere as well. So you can have objects that are composed of different types of polygons with different numbers of sides. So how do we select these? Briefly in that video, it goes through the process. Basically what we do is we right click and hold our mouse button down. So this is the right mouse button I'm holding down on the object, and it brings up this radial menu. And all we do is move our mouse cursor over the option or the type of component we want to select, and then we release the mouse button when the option is highlighted blue. So if I want to select vertices on the object, I can highlight the word vertex and then release the mouse button, and that allows me to select the vertices in the object like this. Likewise, if I want to select a face or faces or polygons as they're otherwise known, I can select face mode. Keep in mind that Maya will actually, in some instances, such as this, refer to a polygon as a face, whereas in other areas of the same software, you'll notice that it actually calls them polygons. They are one and the same thing. Okay, and obviously edge mode. Now there are a few other modes such as UV. UV mode is used when we're applying texture maps. Moving UVs around allows us to align texture images with our objects, and that will be something that we'll be taking a look at throughout the course of the work that we'll be doing. We also have things like vertex face and so on, which kind of give you a weird display. We don't really use these very commonly. So what I'd like to do is go through a couple of different methods or systems that we can use when we're selecting things. So obviously we've taken a look at the right click menu, which is just here. So once again, that's just right clicking and holding. We can select our components like that. So let's look at another way that we can select our components. If we come up to the top of the screen, we have a select by component type button just here. Next to it, we've got a select by object type, and you can see at the moment that this is the one that's toggled on. It looks like it's depressed. Okay. Basically, this green highlight that we've got on this selected object is being indicated primarily by this mode. Okay, so when this toggle button is switched on or active, and we click on an object, we are actually selecting the entire object. When this mode is on, however, we can then select component types. So with our object selected, if I click on select by component type, you can see that at the moment it's currently switched to vertex mode. So I can now select points or vertices within the object. Now I can change the type of component I want to select by using these toggle buttons running along just to the right of the component type button. So we have points or vertices. Okay, we have palm points, which you don't find in polygon objects. These are found in NURBS surfaces, but they're kind of similar to vertices. We have edges. So, and in this case it calls them line components, but it's actually edges. So if I click on that, you can see now I can select the edges in the object. Now notice that the point component mode is still active as well. Okay, so it kind of picks up on the last one that you clicked on. We then have faces. So if I click on that, I can then select faces. So let's have a quick look at maybe doing a multiple selection. So I've got, if I hold down the Shift key and I just left click on a few of these faces, you can see that they all add to the selections. They're all selected now. If I then go back to, let's try going back to point mode. So I'll just click on and click off again, like this. And you can see it's switched to vertex mode or point mode. If I hold down Shift and click, you can see now it's selecting those vertices, but I still have these polygons selected. So it is possible to actually have more than one component type selected at a single moment in time. Keep in mind, however, that this could cause problems with some of your tools. So sometimes it will and sometimes it won't. It's kind of a trial and error, case by case scenario. If, for example, I try to extrude these like this, you can see that it's actually extruding these polygons, and it ignored the vertices that I had selected. Okay, so you just keep in mind, sometimes things will work out the way that you expect them to, sometimes they won't, but you need to generally keep an eye on what you have selected before you perform a specific modeling function or command. I'll switch on edge mode and I'll select a couple of edges as well, and I'll see if that's going to do anything. Usually the extrude tool in this case, you can extrude edges and you can also extrude faces, but you can see here, even with those extra vertices and edges selected, when I've activated this tool, it's ignored those other components and it's only extruded the polygons, because that's generally what you would be using the extrude tool on. Okay. So just keep in mind that you can select multiple different components at once. Every now and then you might come across a tool which asks you to do that or enables you to do that, but a lot of the time really you just need to be working in either polygons or edges or vertices for whatever you're doing. So once again, that's basically how that functions, or what these buttons are along the top. Okay, so if you want to select an object just by itself, this mode has to be toggled, and if you want to select individual components in an object, you can toggle this on. Now don't forget, those options can all be accessed from the right mouse button menu by right clicking and holding on the object. You can see here I've got object mode as well, which just switches back to the regular selection. So let's talk now about what we can do with multiple objects. So I'm just going to duplicate this object. So I have two spheres. So I'll go to Edit, Duplicate. And it places the duplicate object over the top of the original. So I just need to move this off to the side here. So now I have these two spheres. Okay. So in this situation, what we can do is actually hold down Shift and select both spheres. And you'll notice that the last object to be selected is green, and all the previous objects, in this case there's only one, will change their color to white. So you can always identify the last object selected because that's the one that's going to be green outlines instead of white. Okay, so let's say I want to select some polygons on this object and also some more on this object at the same time. So if I right click and hold and select face mode, you can see that this object is still selected, but only this object changed to face mode. And that's because this is the object I use that right mouse button menu on. Okay. Now, if I want to select polygons over here as well, I could also right click on this object and select face mode, and that also will change to face mode. I can then hold down Shift and select polygons on both. Now sometimes I find a slightly easier way of doing that is if I go back to object mode like this, sometimes I find it easier if I just select both objects, and you can see there you can either click and hold Shift down and click both objects, or you can just drag a box like this by holding down the left mouse button, clicking and dragging like this. And the box just needs to touch both objects. It doesn't have to go all the way around like this. Okay. What I can do is get both objects selected, and then I can come up to my component type selection button and just click that. You can see both of them switch to vertex mode in this case. And if I don't want vertex mode selected, let's say I want face mode, I can just click on the face mode button and both switch to face mode at the same time. I tend to find if you're doing multiple objects, that's the slightly easier way of doing it. However, doing it with that method, you need to have all the objects selected to begin with. Let's say we have like another object down here, and let's say I take these two objects and I switch to face mode like this, okay, and then I decide, well, I want this one to be on face mode as well. I can right click on this one and select face, and that now switches to face mode as well. Okay, so you can add extra objects into that face mode if you need to. So let's have a look what happens when I select multiple polygons on different objects and I try and use maybe the extrude tool again on those. So if I click extrude, you can see it will extrude all the selected polygons on all the selected objects like that. Now this can speed up your workflow because you're not having to do each extrusion for each individual object separately. You can just select all the relevant polygons that you want to extrude and just apply the extrusion at once. Now this might be helpful sometimes when you need to create similar detail on different objects. So for example, if I was going to make like a little kind of grill in these areas, what I could do is maybe increase the offset a little bit like this, and I'm holding down Control here so that I can get a finer increment adjustment on this value. If you just left click and drag on the value itself, you'll kind of get like a very large snapping or stepping. You can see it's going up by 0.1 at a time on that number there. Holding Control, it goes up by like 0.01, so I can get more control. Okay, so let's say that's sort of what I want. And if I apply the tool again, so I just turn the extrude tool on again and then take the Z-axis arrow and push it in, you can see it's just going to bring out or push into the surface of the object. If I then just switch all of that off by going to object mode and switching back to select mode, and then I deselect those polygons by clicking in an empty area of the grid, you can see that I've kind of got similar features here as I do over here because I did them all simultaneously. If I was to do that separately, let's say I was going to start off with this over here and maybe grab a couple of those and extrude them in like this, and then extrude them again like that, and then I wanted to have something that was exactly the same kind of measurements over here, I'd have to either write down the measurements or try and remember them as far as those numbers that I used on the extrude tool over here, or I would have to try and guess and sort of kind of do it by eye. I'd have to try and say, okay, well I think it's about that wide, and I think it's going to be about that deep, something like that. Okay, but this detail, the width of these little separations and so on, isn't going to be exactly the same as this unless I've been quite lucky with guessing those values. So doing them all together by doing a multiple selection and switching to face mode simultaneously, I can actually get the same sizes. Now it works with extrude tool. You'll find some tools that will work with and some it won't, so don't try and rely on that too much, but it's a nice little trick now and then to be able to use. Let's just look quickly at a couple of these other selection tools. So obviously we can left click on an object to select, we can hold down Shift and click on another object, we can drag a box across multiple objects like this to select them, and once again the box only has to touch the objects to select, it doesn't have to go all the way around. Okay, Let's say I've got multiple objects selected and I want to deselect an object. I hold down the Control key and either click or drag a box across the objects that I want to deselect. Okay. Let's have a look at, we've got a lasso tool just up here. Okay, so if I click that and then drag a lasso around, you can see it selects that. I can do it across multiple objects or around entire objects. If I hold Control down once again, I can, let's see if I can get this to work. So basically the lasso's touching or going around both spheres. You can see in that case it doesn't really work that well. Okay, what should have happened there is that these two should have deselected and this should have remained selected. So I tend not to use the lasso tool very much. I tend to find that it's actually easier just using the regular selection. The last selection tool is the Paintbrush Select, and this is a fantastic tool. So if I click on this paint selection tool, okay, oftentimes it will actually switch to vertex mode or point mode, okay, but sometimes it doesn't. You can always change the mode up here if you need to. Basically the way this works is it works like a paintbrush. So if I hold down the left mouse button and then drag, it will start to select polygons as I drag across or paint across the surface of the object. Now the way this is working is that the paintbrush itself is actually recognizing the center point of each polygon. So as long as the brush covers or goes across the center point of the object, it will select the polygon. Okay, so you can see up here in the tool settings that this is a soft edge brush. We've got these different profiles. So what happens here is if I hold down the left mouse button and start painting, you can see that it's selecting the polygons above and below, but it's not selecting the ones side to side. And that's because the center point of those polygons is slightly outside the area that is sort of fully opaque or fully visible on this brush type. Okay, so there's actually a fall off inside this red circle for the brush. So everything inside the circle is not completely 100% active. Okay, the edge of the circle doesn't select, but the closer to the center you get, the more likely the brush will select. Okay, so generally what you want to do is try and go over the middle of each polygon you want selected. Once again, if you need to deselect, you can hold down Control and then brush back over as well. Okay, if you want to change the size of the brush, you can either change it here in the radius setting, or a quicker way of doing it is to hold down B and you get this little arrow cursor, and all you do is hold down left mouse button and drag left to go smaller or right to go bigger, and you can see up here it's changed that value. So that's the quicker option. So sometimes if you've got very, very small polygons like these ones up here, you'll want to change your brush size, and because I've already got these selections here, you can see that I don't have to hold down Shift by default for adding to the selection. All I have to do is hold down Control if I want to deselect something. Okay, so you need to change your brush size, but that can be fantastic if you've got very, very fiddly selections to make, and it's quicker than holding Shift and just clicking on each individual polygon. So those are some of the select options in Maya, and these kind of expand on some of the information provided in the basic skills videos. So with that said, I'll see you next time.